All right. Welcome, everybody, to MBA 625 on entrepreneurial financing. Today is the second session. Marks the start of the second week. And hopefully you all felt like the first week went well. My feedback to all of you as I put on the announcement board today and after I completed grading the week one coursework is that you all are doing an excellent job. It's a breath of fresh air to have all three of you, and then there's only three of you, but to have all three of you who are in this course taking it seriously, staying caught up, doing a great job, following instructions. It's like you've done this before, so I know you have. So anyway, just really appreciate all three of you doing a great job this last week. Makes my job much more fulfilling and exciting when I've got folks who are anxious to do things the right way and to get good scores. So far, all of you are in great shape. And like I say, pat yourself on the back for a great week. Hopefully we'll have another good week this week. We'll extend some of the information that we started last week within the ebook on chapters 1 and 2. This week we'll be looking at chapter 3. A little bit of a difference this week. We are not going to have a test. Instead, the assessment is a 750-word short essay, and we'll get to that here in just a second. We'll visit about that. One of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is angel money and venture capital again. And we're also going to be talking about the SBA a little bit more tonight. So we're going to expand or deepen our understanding on a few different points that we've alluded to last week and that the book alluded to last week, but just dig down a little bit deeper. Once again, many companies seek angel investing, seek venture capital. Most companies actually don't accomplish either one of those. So although venture capital and private equity and angel investing moves a lot of money and finances a lot of projects, as a percentage of the total projects, ideas, startups that are out there, not too many get this kind of financing. So why is it important that we learn about it? Why is it important that we know about it? It's important that we learn about it and know about it because these are financing tools if you all ever decide to start a business or have an idea that you want to be an entrepreneur with, that would be very helpful for you to understand. Also, if you decide to participate in a startup, even if you're not the owner or the founder or the president of that company, your knowledge or expertise about these concepts could be very helpful. So not only would you perhaps be the small business owner looking to accomplish financing like this or investors like this, but you also might just be participating with one that really could lean on you for your help and perspective as it pertains to this type of financing. Now, having said that, even though a lot of companies don't end up with VC money or with angel money, many of the most popular and common large companies in the United States were started or at some point were financed or helped with VC, venture capital, private equity, or angel investor money. So companies like Facebook took on lots of private equity and venture capital money as it grew. And it allowed it to finance significant growth, especially in the early years of a company that by any account at this point is highly, highly successful. Companies like Uber and Lyft, which are two of the ride-sharing companies that are most commonly used now, both of those companies went through rounds of financing through venture capital to enable them to grow and expand and accomplish market share at a pace that they would have never been able to accomplish without that venture capital money. So many, like I say, of the companies that you're familiar with, big companies that now maybe are more mature, but at some point they had to start, right? And they had to grow and they had to fend off competitors and they had to develop market share and build out their infrastructure. These things are highly costly. And as we mentioned before, the participation from banks, especially with early financing of companies, is fairly limited. And most of these folks don't have just unlimited reserves. Even if they do start off with some money, they don't have unlimited reserves. And so venture capital, rounds of venture capital and money, from investors becomes very, very important, if not critical, to their survival and to their, a key to how they flourish in the end, or their success. So we'll go over some more examples tonight, but I just wanted to give that brief overview, as we are going to be talking once again about venture capital, angel investing, and a little bit about the SBA tonight. So let's start talking about this week. Of course, we've got our normal set of coursework criteria for this week, the checkpoints being, the easy one that we just look at every day. And again, good work to all of you for staying diligent with those checkpoints this last week. I think all of you accomplished all of the checkpoints, which again is a rarity when it comes to teaching online classes, to have a course, even if there's just 3 of you, that all 3 of you are doing such a great job staying consistent and diligent with those. This week, your assignment is going to be to look at the SBA's, so the Small Business Administrations, which is a government agency, as we've described last week. But the assignment this week calls for you to explore the SBA website, find the tools and information generally that's available there, and then write a short essay regarding those tools and opportunities available. We'll look at that site a little bit later tonight and kind of poke around on it and just give you some ideas for the assignment, but that's what the assignment is. The assessment, as I mentioned earlier, is not a test this week, but is a short essay on Garage.com, which is basically an incubator for small businesses that usually have to do with tech. So it's usually tech small businesses, and they've got a list, a very long list of different tech companies that they've helped with rounds of funding from investors in order to help those companies launch and grow. Perhaps the most notable of the list right now, and you may recognize some of the other companies, many of which I don't recognize, but I think we'd all recognize Pandora. Pandora, the music streaming company, is one of their portfolio companies, what you call a portfolio company for a venture capital firm. They like to list and promote their portfolio companies, of course, because they've got skin in the game. They're investors now in those companies and are laser focused on those companies succeeding and growing and being profitable, because that's how they will in turn make their money and a significant return on investment. So that's Garage.com. That's another short essay based on that website. What I'd like you to do on both websites is read up as much of the information as you have time for, and then take a few notes in general categories of things you found interesting. I don't want you to tell me what's on the site. I want you to tell me about what's on the site. So don't give me a travel log of you surfing through the site and all the things that you found. You can definitely tell me what you found, but I want more specifically some description about what you found, what your thoughts are about that, perspective, opinion. Those types of things are much more important than just, here's what's on the site, right? That's not what we're asking for. We're asking for, what did you find and how could that help you as a small business owner? What did you think about the different tools and opportunities that you found? Okay. All right, so that's the assessment this week. The discussion this week, and I think at least one of you is already on it, and we'll see a few more of you probably by Wednesday, but the discussion this week is about a distant relative that has an idea for a technology that can help enhance the gas mileage of vehicles. What's interesting about this particular example is, a few years back, and this has probably been 10 years now ago, there was a company in Provo, Utah, which is where I'm from, a couple professors from the local university, and then some other entrepreneurs that started a business called Razor Technologies. And if you're curious, you could look up Razor Technologies. It's a company that now is bankrupt. It's the predecessor of a company called Via Motors that is now doing very well, as far as as far as I know. But Razor Technologies was a company that years ago promoted this idea of having a technology, a patent on a technology that would allow a gas burning vehicle to basically be a hybrid with its battery. And because of that technology, it would be able to go, up to 100 miles a gallon, just like this example, interestingly enough. And Razor Technologies went down the road of getting financing, getting investors, was able to get quite a bit of money from investors, and then eventually got to a point where they could not get the technology that they had, their patented technology. They couldn't get economies of scale to produce their technology on a widespread basis, and because of that, they ended up bankrupting the company Razor Technology. All the investors lost everything they put into it. And then they've relabeled the company VIA Motors, and if you look up VIA Motors, VIA Motors, you'll find a new company, a relatively new company within the last few years, that has a technology that enhances gas mileage. Once again, same thing as Razor Technology, some of the same names and faces that were at Razor, but bankrupted that firm and then started this new one. So interesting how companies and corporate changes happen when it comes to investors. I think most of us would be fairly timid or skeptical. We'd be very skeptical if we saw the track record of the average startup that got venture capital or private equity money, because many of these will fail, of course, and many times no one will get any money back on their investment. And so the reason that sometimes you talk about getting a 4x or a 6x or a 12x or a 2,000 times your investment type situation is because that has to make up for the many times that you get nothing back on your investment, like you would have with Razor Technology here in Utah County on an enhanced gas mileage technology. So anyway, that's a side story to a related topic, but the point for this week's discussion is to post about how you would determine whether or not to invest in this distant relatives technology, and try to consider the advantages and disadvantages of both it being a distant relative, but also being a technology that is not yet potentially patented, and a technology that is not yet potentially even created. It's just an idea, right? An idea for that technology. So there are definitely some pros and cons of that. Getting in early is potentially an advantage, right? But getting in with, even if it's a distant relative family and then only having not even having a prototype yet, can be some disadvantages of that opportunity. So some interesting things to think about for this week's discussion. Once again, for all discussions, you've got some references that you need to post, but the primary reason that we're on the discussion board is to talk through opinions that we have, to think through opinions that we have, and then put them down on paper. And so, of course, not paper, put them onto the discussion board electronically. Anyway, the point is that we think through opinions and perspectives that we have on this particular situation. The point is not to go research and find information and then just regurgitate that information onto the discussion board. All of us can find information very easily. What we're anxious for in this particular part of the coursework is for us to think through, do some critical thinking and think through advantages, disadvantages, pros, cons, different issues that we should be thinking about when it comes to this scenario, and our opinions, right? There's not a right or wrong answer, but we do want to make sure you've thought through it, okay? Always easier to think through it after you've read the required material, as I mentioned last week, and we'll remind you of this week. And I do expect that this session's been reviewed and that you've read the chapter and read the required article that is part of this week's readings and tools, and that you will have demonstrated within the discussion board, within the assignments, and the assessment for this particular week that you have more knowledge than just an article or two that you've just looked up for the assignment, that you've actually looked through the chapter and read the chapter, looked through the assigned reading material as far as the online article, and then also that you've taken a look and reviewed the session, okay? All right, so that's this week's coursework. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the SBA and taking a look at Garage here a little bit later tonight, but that's a heads up, an overview on what you should expect as far as what needs to happen this week. Just as a quick reminder, just a housekeeping issue, I'll be heading out of town for our spring break, taking a road trip that will go through this weekend and on to Wednesday next week. Because of that, I will be pre-recording next week's session. It will not be a live session, but it will be pre-recorded and posted for you to be able to review probably as soon as this weekend, actually, so you'll have a head start on week 3. And then, yeah, you'll be able to have that. Now, I should be able to do some discussion board posts even as I travel. That shouldn't be an issue, but I will not be doing the live session on Monday as I'll be on the road. Okay? So just a heads up, nobody's shown up to the live session so far, but I don't want somebody to show up for the first time and not have it be live. Like I say, that will be the 1 week, this mod, where it will be a pre-recorded session because of my travel schedule. Okay. So this week, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the article from coxblue.com, but the one article that is required this week online, the online article that is part of the requirement this week for the readings, is an article about the stages of VC funding. And this is something that we've already written about last week within our assignments, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this other than to say repetition is helpful. You'll remember, right, if we repeat. And so if you did the assignment last week and then just briefly review this particular article, I think you'll find a lot of the material that you found last week again, but maybe formatted a little bit differently, worded a little bit differently, and talked about a little bit differently. So basically, he just goes through these 5 stages. He calls them something a little bit different than, these different categories, a little bit different than the book or the textbook did, but basically the same idea. First, you've got an idea, right? A seed opportunity. Then you've got a startup opportunity. Then you've got what we would call survival, right, but early stage. Then you've got expansion stage, and then you've got a mezzanine or pre-IPO stage, or the more mature stage of the cycle. And each part of the cycle, I will point out here, requires different equity ownership or different upside potential from investors in order for them to invest. So if you were to guess, just thinking about as we're talking, which part of the cycle would require you as a business owner to give up more of your equity ownership to investors? So if you're starting a business, and let's say you're in the seed or research and development phase of your business, in that phase, would investors require more from you as far as ownership, or would they require less from you? Okay, maybe that's a tricky question, but it should be fairly straightforward and obvious that the earlier that investors come in, the more equity ownership, the more value in return they're going to demand. And why is that? It's because it's the earlier in the cycle, the more risk that's associated with their investment, and also more time that they have to wait before they get a return on their investment. So if you're a late stage pre-IPO company, right, that final stage where somebody's just coming in to insert some cash flow in order to help you, to bridge you to your initial public offering and to go public, that late stage firm investment will not require nearly as much equity and upside potential as somebody who comes in when you're just an idea, right? When you're an incubator status, where we're just trying to germinate hatch some idea that might be good, but it's still in idea stage. It's not necessarily even in product stage or even in a stage where we can start making revenue. Okay, that is the Cox Blue article. I do want to spend a little bit of time tonight talking about the chapter, chapter 3, go into a little bit more detail than usual for this chapter. One of the things that the chapter talks about this week is a review of something that you've probably had in every single corporate finance class that you've taken to this point in your education. And that is that there are different types of businesses, and each type of business is different based on the longevity of the entity, the liability of the owners, okay, is different. The number of owners, the taxation of the entity, the sources of capital can be different, and this is where this might be different than other finance classes you've looked into when it comes to these different entity types. So when you talk about sole proprietorships, limited partnerships, LLCs, sub S corporations, and then C corps, or just what we'd refer to as corporations, when you refer to those different types of business entities, usually prior to this point in a finance class, you were focused on how many owners are there, how much liability is there for the owners, how long does the entity last? You know, if the owner dies, does the company go away like it does with the sole proprietor? But a corporation, no, it would continue, right? So we've probably gone through this before. Corporations, sub S's, corporations, and LLCs, or excuse me, just sub S corporations and LLCs have flow-through income, right, to the owners. Corporations or C corps actually are taxed at the corporate level. So there's different taxation for each of these entities, but the point that I'm trying to make is that they're different, right? These different entities for many reasons. The point in this class that we're trying to be focused on is how does the source of capital or financing change between these different entities. You may know at this point or already understand that IPOs, right, are a function, initial public offerings are a function of a public corporation. They have to be a C Corp entity in order to have an initial public offering. However, angel investors are willing to many times invest in all kinds of different companies. Usually, investors are only interested in limited partnerships, corporations, and LLCs. And the reason for this is the liability piece, right? They want to invest as a limited partner or as an investor, not as someone who holds an individual note potentially with a proprietor, okay, with a general partnership or with a sole proprietor, because if they do, that can potentially bring liability on them as an investor or operator, owner of that company, okay, of that sole proprietor. So when it comes to financing, and the book talks about this on page 85 after it goes through these different entities, there's a column on equity capital sources. And if you're a sole proprietorship, the primary source of financing comes from, or the equity ownership financing comes from, usually the proprietor themselves, right? General partners might have family or friends or other partners. Limited partnerships can have general partners and limited partners, right? So they can have investors that are limited partners. Corporations are the most common type of entity that is able to do raises through venture capital. Okay, but sub-S's and LLCs also can do raises with VCs and with private equity as well. Okay. There were a few other things in the book that I wanted to address. It talks about, for corporations, you have a corporate charter, articles of incorporation, and corporate bylaws. The reason I bring these up is because one of the due diligence items in most cases from angel investors, private equity groups, venture capital groups, is to check the corporate structure, first of all, the corporate type, of course, and they might encourage you to change that corporate type in order to enhance your ability or enable you to get an investment from them. But also, once you are in the right corporate type, which is usually a sub-S, LLC, or a C Corp, once you're in that entity type, they will, within their due diligence, make sure and check your corporate charter, your articles of incorporation, and your corporate bylaws. And the reason they'll do this is because they don't want to get caught in a situation where you're not registered correctly, where maybe the name of your company is not matching documentation and their investment. There are just little nuances that legally can become a headache later, and their due diligence team is going to make sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted before you ever are able to bring in those resources. And you'll want to make sure to have someone or yourself, double check these documents before you get to the point where you're asking somebody for money. It can be very embarrassing if these documents aren't complete or if they maybe say something within them that contradicts your ability to bring in new cash and new investors. So, for example, your corporate bylaws might have something about, your share dilution, and without a vote of your board of directors or all owners, you might not be able to dilute your shares, which means in most cases that most venture capital, private equity, and angel investors would not be interested in even investing in your company. Usually those folks are looking for equity ownership, and if your corporate bylaws disallow for that or don't allow for that, it's unlikely that you'll be able to bring on investors very easily. So corporate charter and articles of incorporation and corporate bylaws, just a good checklist, making sure that your documentation is in order and making sure that the rules of your corporation contained in the bylaws allow for what you're doing as far as bringing on investors. Okay. Book talks a lot about each one of these entities. I'm not going to. It talks about the taxation. Of course, the taxation would be critical. You need to know the basics of your taxation, because if you're trying to create pro forma that has to do with, projections for income, assets, and your cash flow, those things would all be impacted, obviously, by how you're taxed and how much you're taxed. So having correct projections based on your entity type and the tax rate associated with your entity type is really important. Then the book goes on to talk about IP, or what we refer to as IP, but should probably be referred to in a class like this as intellectual property, right? So the full name. The idea is that if you have an idea, okay, if you have a product, if you have something that's going to change the world, that's why you have a desire to start a business. One of the most important things that you can do is to make sure that, if at all possible, you protect your idea. Okay, I can't remember offhand the name of the last 2 or 3 movies that I saw about something like this, but there was one about McDonald's, there was one about, the Facebook a while ago, but there's been multiple movies about basically people who come up with good ideas and somebody steals their idea, or just maybe even inadvertently thinks that they came up with the idea, but it was in conjunction with other people that they don't end up giving credit to. Just like plagiarism in a class like this, which is, of course, unacceptable, where you're stealing somebody else's ideas and information without referencing it. In the world of business and business ideas, there's this concept of intellectual property, and you do have the ability to protect it. Now, having said that, sometimes you have better ability than others to be able to protect this intellectual property, and we'll get into a little bit of the reasons why on that. But the point is, if you have a product, you can patent it, right? You can apply for a patent, which is basically legal protection for your idea, okay, as far as a product is concerned. You can also protect legally trade secrets. So, for example, Coca-Cola protects the Coke recipe, right, as a trade secret. And if someone were to steal their trade secret, they could then have the right to go sue that company or sue that person for protection of their trade secret. Then you have trademarks, which is written a logo or a company corporate name. Those are things that you can trademark. You can copyright a line or something that is your motto. And if you trademark or copyright something in writing, technically others should not be able to use that, okay? Or they shouldn't be able to use it without permission. I don't remember if it was Taylor Swift or somebody else that basically trademarked some different lines from some of her songs, but that's not uncommon for artists to trademark, if they've got something they've come up with. Of course, they copyright all their songs, but in addition to that, they might trademark a certain, line that becomes popular or common. And technically, without permission, you're not able to use that trademarked property, okay? So this is how you protect a book that you write. This is how you protect an idea that you have for a product. This is how you protect an idea you have for how to execute on something as far as services or how to do a business differently. But all of these things require more than just saying, okay, I've got intellectual property. You have to actually legally file for all of these. Okay, if you haven't or don't, then technically it never was protected. Okay, which can get you into a situation where you don't have the protection that you thought you had. Okay. All right, excuse me. So important to make sure that if you do have intellectual property or are dealing with a company as an investor or as someone asking for investments, one of the first things that they'll ask, and this is something you hear about all the time on Shark Tank, right? They'll ask, you have a patent, right? And it's one of the first questions that they ask most everybody who comes onto the show. As soon as somebody sees those ideas and there's not a patent in place, it just opens the door for somebody else to copy it. And in a world like we live that's so competitive, people are always looking to copy ideas. We had a restaurant here in Utah open some years ago called Chatters. And Chatters was almost an exact replication of In-N-Out. In-N-Out hadn't yet opened in Utah. And so, an entrepreneur said, hey, we're going to call it something different, and we're going to basically copy In-N-Out. And, we know that there's a lot of demand, pent-up demand in Utah, because there's a lot of people who are from California or travel to California. They really like In-N-Out, but there's no In-N-Out in Utah. So Chatters opened up, and within just a couple short years, Chatters, I think, financially did pretty well, but then got sued and closed down by the In-N-Out Corporation, which came in and basically said, you've copied everything we do. You're substantially similar, so you can't. It's indefensible that you're going to say, well, I have a different name, we're a different company, because everything else about what you're doing, even down to the color schemes, was similar, almost identical to what In-N-Out does. So they were caught, they were sued, and they were shut down. Now, in the world of intellectual property, just know, and I alluded to this on the discussion board today in a comment that I made, in the world of intellectual property, there are haves and have-nots when it comes to resources, right? So if I'm developing a wind technology, a wind power, technology, and GE catches wind, not even meaning to use a pun there, but if they were to catch word, is maybe a better way of putting it, of my project, and if they feel like it's a legitimately good idea, a company like GE's research and development team might either consciously or subconsciously, either on purpose or even by accident, sometimes this does happen, they might steal my idea with the idea that I'm too small to come after a big company like GE for stealing my idea. Now, that's not always how it works, and many companies have a little bit more ethic, fortitude than that. A lot of companies will have a culture where the company itself would never verbally support, the stealing of ideas, but different research teams that have a lot of pressure to come up with good new ideas and to keep up with the competition, they themselves might have that pressure or feel a pressure to maybe steal ideas from others. And then in the back of their mind, by the time that they roll it out, by the time they roll it out and it becomes big enough, they'll have already benefited from the ride. Even if it does come back, they might get their hand slapped, right? And this happens, it's happened recently many times within the cell phone companies. And I mean cell phone manufacturers. So between Samsung and Apple, they're constantly suing each other for infringement of patents that they each have, because basically both of them have R&D teams. Whenever they come up with anything, even ideas and concept, they just file for patents, patent after patent after patent after patent. And then they basically go back through, and whatever the other one does, they basically sue them for infringement on their patents, even if they hadn't rolled it out. It's just kind of a game that big corporations play. Well, if you're a small fish, these companies will come after you and come after you hard and shut you down. Some companies will grant you more time on purpose, and then financially it'll be in their best interest to go out and shut you down after you've gone a little bit further and have some money for them to take from you. And then finally, some companies will wait. If you're infringing on their patent legitimately, they'll sue you. If you just have a better idea than they do, they'll buy you and shut you down that way. So not to be negative or not to be discouraging about being a small player when it comes to trying to be a new idea in a big ocean of different big companies that can smash you. But this is just the reality of small business ownership that you should be aware of. Many times, young, nimble companies with great ideas have the advantage because they're able to change and change with different things that are changing in the environment and in the economy, where big companies can't do that as well. But at some point, they either buy you out, smash you, steal your ideas. There's ways for those companies to basically push you out if they really want to. And a great example of that is a company like Microsoft, where for years, if you were a company trying to develop operating systems for computers, they were going to find a way to push you out of the business. Either push you out of the business or outcompete you with ideas that were somehow similar to the things that you were working on at the time. They settled many lawsuits about stealing technology, stealing ideas, and stepping on smaller companies to get to where they are today, which is the dominant operating system platform in the world, right? It rarely happens that a company can accomplish that without squishing people along the way. Okay, it's not impossible, but I think it's fairly well documented that Microsoft was pretty brutal, pretty ruthless about squashing everybody that got in their path as far as competitors. Sometimes very ethically and just were out competed them. Other times, the ethics were a little bit more questionable. All right. That's intellectual property, a very, very important concept when it comes to being an entrepreneur, and a very, very important concept when it comes to asking for money. Because one of the first things, as I mentioned before, that the Shark Tank folks and anybody who's giving money, as a VC group or representing investor money, they are going to be very curious and very anxious to know that your intellectual property is protected. Okay? All right. Then we get into more about financing again. And some of these concepts are going to look similar. In fact, the book actually refers to Garage.com. That's part of our is our assessment this week, if I'm not mistaken. It's either our assignment or assessment, but Garage.com is mentioned by the book, as this matchmaker when it comes to investors and startup ideas, especially as it pertains to tech, as we mentioned. And they've, been involved in hundreds of startups. Talks about University of Michigan as another, a lot of the big colleges will provide loans and resources to startup companies. Gives you a lot of examples. Figure 3.8, which is on page, I have no clue now. It doesn't show me for some reason. 106. So if you look at page 106, it's got a great list of different companies that are how they got, where they got their money as a seed company. Just looking through them, I don't recognize any of them. Well, I recognize a couple. Sorry. I recognize Cranium Incorporated, which is the board game, right? Cranium. It's a pretty popular board game. But most of those I don't recognize. They're probably all successful and just more companies that I've never heard of. It happens to me every day. Always new companies. And then it talks about the concept of financial bootstrapping, which is basically the concept that as owners, you work out of the garage, you minimize your costs, you don't take salaries potentially, you don't take any income, and you just try to make it work. And that's called bootstrapping. So and bootstrapping is fairly common among Yeah, very common among small business owners in the early stage, in the seed stage, right? It's very difficult to get investors or even angels to look at you in that seed stage. Once you get through that seed stage and have prototypes or have some revenue, then it's a little bit easier to get people's attention, get financing, and get funding. All right. There's a graphic that I've got here that I've put into a slide that basically goes through the first three stages and types of financing that occurs in those three stages, which I think is interesting. I wanted to point out. Trying to look back, there was something in the book that I also thought was interesting. Let's just look here. Oh, I know what it was. I thought it was interesting, the article that at the very beginning, actually, about the Fantasticks, which is a ongoing Broadway musical that's been going on for years and years and years, right? And maybe you haven't heard of it, but it's one of the longest ongoing Broadway musicals of all time. And it just talks about how the word angel, the term angel investors came from Broadway. We're talking about angels of Broadway theater that were some of the original investors in getting some of these folks with good ideas onto Broadway and into the different arts, to help them, to launch them basically into the different arts. And so there's still an official title called the Off-Broadway Angels, a 501c3, which is just a charity, right, that raises funds basically and then supports through funding, these different ideas for off-Broadway shows. So it talks about Marjorie and Malcolm Gray back in 1960 giving $330 to the Broadway musical The Fantasticks to get them up and running. That $330 investment turned into more than $80,000 of return over the last 50, 60 years. And it's kind of fun because obviously that's a 24,000% return on investment. But the idea is that it's just something that's been really good, and that's what angel investors are trying to look for, is opportunities that can return significant returns, because there will be a lot of them. We don't know this about the Grays, but in this particular example, they very well might have invested in a lot of other musicals that didn't ever become popular over the years. So it's just something that's risky enough that that's where that angel investors terminology comes from, but actually comes from Broadway. Usually, Broadway steals things from business or steals things from other areas or genres, but in this case, Wall Street stole Broadway's terminology when it comes to the angels. Okay, angel investing anyway. So we want to talk a little bit about the SBA. We don't have a lot of time to discuss the SBA, but I did want to just look at the website together for a second. So let's go there. So the SBA site is kind of busy. It's got a lot of different information. This is just a government site, though, that's trying to help us understand more about what the SBA does. And so there's a lot of articles. There's a lot of different information for this week's, for the assignment, a lot of different links to other sites. The bottom line is, and we talked about this before, the SBA is a very important entity in this country, because private investing is not nearly enough, and the banks are not nearly enough to finance a lot of the small businesses that take place in this country. And we've got a very entrepreneurial spirit about, an entrepreneurial culture, in this country. And so to not have the SBA program would stifle a lot of small businesses that are trying to just make it and get started. Because there's a donut hole where banks are not willing to give financing or take the risk for a small business owner that's starting out. And private equity and venture capital are very specific in the types of businesses they want. And so there's just a lot of businesses that wouldn't fall into either one of those categories if not for the SBA. Okay, Small Business Administration. Basically, they partner with banks and guarantee a portion of the loan that banks are offering, so that banks are more willing to, it basically helps motivate banks to give loans to individuals that they normally wouldn't for their business opportunities, for their business ventures. Okay. So anyway, there's a lot of different information that you can find out. I click on, like, for example, the Learning Center here. There's all kinds of different programs associated with the SBA, different side programs, ways. I mean, the cool thing about this site is there's just a lot of articles and good information about running a business too, not just, obviously the SBA is laser focused on making sure business owners are successful because they have a lot of skin in the game. They're supporting small business around the country to the tune of millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so they give you these different topics: financing, government contracting, managing a business, marketing, starting a business. They give you these different categories because they want just as much as you do, maybe not just as much as you do, but they are laser focused on making sure to try to help business owners become successful, especially if they're on the hook for some of the financing, right? So how to prepare a loan package for a bank, finding and attracting investors, which is something that we're talking about quite a bit in this class. There's an article on that, a course about it. Free course, by the way. So just lots of resources that you can potentially use. Like I say, the government is very focused because they've got millions, if not billions of dollars invested into small business owners here in this country, in trying to help make sure that business owners, as a general rule, have the resources and tools and information that they need in order to be successful with those loans and with their businesses. Okay. All right, this is the article just to show you real quick from Cox Blue that we just discussed briefly, the 5 stages of VCs. And then the other article this week the other site is Garage.com. When you go to their About page, they talk about how they're a seed stage and early stage venture capital fund. They invest in entrepreneurial teams seeking to transform big ideas into game-changing companies. Okay, so the idea is they, unlike many VCs, are actually focused on the seed stage. Great ideas with new ideas and companies, where a lot of VCs are more focused on more established firms. So, here's their history in 1998. Garage.com. They've helped over 100 startups in the first 5 years with raise over $400 million. Pandora is the one, like I say, that you're probably most familiar with, but there's a lot of others. And then of course they name a few that are their top ones. CalPERS, which is the largest pension plan in America through California, the state of California, is one of their big investors. Once you get CalPERS on board, as far as companies are concerned, as far as pension funds are concerned, that adds just all kinds of legitimacy to what they're doing, because CalPERS goes through a very rigorous process before they invest money anywhere. So just as an aside, the Sequoia Fund, also very, very reputable fund, highly respected, and also another place where if you get money from them, it must mean that you're doing something very right. Okay, so those are the 2 sites that we're looking at. That's a little bit more about the SBA. Basically, the SBA's history. Oh, wrong page. Sorry, one sec. Basically, the SBA's history is it was legislated into existence, the SBA, much like Fannie, Freddie, Sally, all these different agencies and public-private partnerships that are out there that support different entities, different industries. And in this case, we're talking about specifically small business owners. It came into existence primarily because government saw a significant void in small business owners' ability to get financing and to grow their businesses. And so the SBA started to provide that and help banks to be more motivated to lend to these folks, as they're starting their businesses. Hugely important in this country as far as the amount of small business ownership that occurs here. When you take small business ownership here in the United States and then compare that to many other countries around the world, the U.S. has for many years dominated the small business space. And one of the reasons that's happened is because of the SBA and the support that we get as far as that government partnership with small business owners here in this country, and how effectively it's administered through banks and financial institutions. We talked about how many site resources there are. There's a lot more to be explored there, and so I'll look forward to getting your essays as they come. That's the material for this evening. We'll go ahead and end a few minutes early, but just wanted to we could definitely discuss if we had somebody here live, but where we don't, we'll just wrap it up. If you've got any questions or concerns as we go about this week, let me know. Happy to help in any way I possibly can, but you guys, as a general rule, are doing an incredibly good job. Maybe I'll just tell you one thing, and you can wrap up if you want, but one of the things that happened to me when I started my small business back in 2008, and in the end of 2007 actually, is banks were writing loans, as you all were probably aware if you lived through that, much too lax at that point. So my business partner and I both met with bankers and asked for a loan for a brand new business that didn't have any cash flow. We gave them kind of a haphazard, business plan. It wasn't very detailed. It wasn't even very good. In hindsight, I can't believe the bank gave us anything. But yeah, both of us with just a very quick application and signature were able to secure a pretty significant amount of money in order to help fund that venture that we started, back in the end of 2007. Like I say, that was primarily a company that went into existence in 2008. My point is, even the SBA goes through these cycles where at different times it's much harder to get a loan than others. 2007 was a very easy time to get a loan. If you tried to get a loan the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, it was much, much harder. And it's just become more difficult. They're scrutinizing every little detail a lot more than they used to. And in part because of the financial crisis in 2008. I don't know that we have financial results necessarily from the SBA. I don't know that they publish them or that it's all public information, but the results financially from 2008 and 2009 had to be pretty devastating to the agency. Like they were devastating to Fannie and Freddie, back then with mortgage loans, because so many small business owners just got squeezed. It was just too tight, it was too hard, and they ended up defaulting on their loans. But the point is, their underwriting standards have gotten a lot harder. It's a lot more difficult now to get loans than it was back when I did it in 2007, as far as SBA loans. So that's just an aside. Have a great evening. Have a good week this week. Let's see some good work again like we did last week, and let me know if there's anything I can do. Good night.